You think you want ancient life until night falls. The sun is gone. The road beneath your feet has turned to mud, ash, animal waste, and whatever the city threw out before dusk. Somewhere in the dark, a child is crying. A dog is pulling at something in the gutter. Smoke hangs low over the rooftops, trapped between cramped walls and narrow alleys, and every breath tastes like a fire that never really goes out. There are no streetlights. No ambulance. No clean faucet waiting behind a door. No number to call if something goes wrong. And something will go wrong. Because the ancient world was not built for you. It was not clean enough, safe enough, warm enough, fair enough, or forgiving enough. We remember its monuments because stone survives. We remember its emperors because power writes its own memory. We remember the gold, the marble, the banners, the myths. But most people in ancient times did not live inside history's highlight reel. They lived close to hunger, close to infection, close to pain, and terrifyingly close to death. That is the first illusion to break. When people imagine the ancient world, they usually picture what was impressive. Rome at its height. Egypt under blazing skies. Greece in white stone and blue water. Vast markets. Bronze armor. Great walls. Huge temples rising above the earth like they were built by giants. It feels cinematic because it was. But if you stepped into that world for real, stripped of your modern protections, the beauty would last about 5 minutes. Then your body would notice where it really was. You would notice the smell first. Not one smell. Layers of them. Wet straw, unwashed wool, sweat dried into fabric, old blood, cooking smoke, manure, urine, fish, mud, open drains, rotting scraps, damp wood, and bodies packed too close together. Even the richest ancient cities were full of things modern people work every day to hide, clean, bury, filter, flush, sterilize, or remove. In ancient times, much of it stayed in the open. It sat in the street. It seeped into walls. It collected in corners. It mixed with food, feet, animals, weather, and water. And that matters more than any king or battle ever could. Because survival is never really about the glamorous parts of history. It is about the ordinary things. What you drink. Where you sleep. What cuts your skin? What lives in your food? What happens when winter comes? What happens when your stomach turns? What happens when your tooth starts to ache and never stops? Most modern people imagine ancient death as something dramatic. A sword in battle. A lion in an arena. A raid at the edge of an empire. But the truth is much quieter, and much worse. Ancient life killed people in small ways. Repeated ways. Boring ways. The ways that don't look impressive in paintings. A fever after a scratch. Bad water after a hot day. Smoke in the lungs over years. Malnutrition that weakens the body a little more each season. A winter night. A summer disease. A birth. A childhood illness. A stomach infection. A wound that should have been nothing. That is why you probably would not survive. Not because you are weak. Because you are specialized. Your body has been trained by a modern world it did not build for itself but now depends on completely. Clean water appears with a twist of the hand. Food arrives from vast systems you never see. Waste vanishes. Infections are interrupted. Pain is treated. Temperatures are controlled. Teeth are repaired. Cuts are cleaned. Labor is reduced by machines. Light defeats darkness with a switch. Behind your ordinary day stands a silent army of chemistry, engineering, medicine, logistics, sanitation, and law. Take those away, and history changes shape immediately. Now imagine waking up in an ancient city before dawn. There is no mattress in the modern sense. No sealed room. No glass keeping out weather, dust, insects, and sound. The air is thick. You have not slept well, because ancient sleep is not peaceful sleep. It is broken sleep. Public sleep. Vulnerable sleep. Maybe on straw. Maybe on rough fabric. Maybe beside other bodies for warmth. Maybe under a roof that leaks. Maybe in a room where smoke from yesterday's fire still clings to the beams. Maybe with fleas. Maybe with lice. Maybe with animals close enough to hear breathing. Before the day begins, your body is already losing. Then comes water. Not the idea of water. The reality of it. Where did it come from? Who touched it? What was upstream? What seeped into it? What sat in the container last week? Was the source protected? Was it shared with animals? Was it near waste? Was it standing too long in heat? In the ancient world, water was life, but it was also risk. A clear stream could still carry death. A stored jar could still betray you. A city fountain could still reflect systems that failed long before you arrived. And you would not always know. That ignorance is another reason modern people would struggle. Ancient survival often depended on knowledge too local, too practical, too inherited to learn quickly. Which food was safe in lean months? Which water to trust after rain? Which streets to avoid after dark? Which people had power over which spaces? Which symptoms meant wait and which meant run? Which seasons brought sickness? Which markets cheated? Which smells warned of rot? Which customs could protect you, and which mistake could get you beaten, robbed, cast out, or worse? History looks simpler from a distance. Up close, it is a maze. Even basic hygiene, something so ordinary now that people complain if soap smells wrong, becomes a brutal test. Washing is not guaranteed. Heat for boiling is work. Fuel costs effort. Fabric stays dirty longer. Skin infections spread faster. Hair carries things. Hands touch everything. Shared spaces multiply risk. Public life means exposure, and privacy, one of the most underrated shields in modern life, becomes rare. You are seen more, touched more, crowded more, and separated less from the filth, sickness, and desperation of everyone around you. That does something to the mind as much as the body. Because ancient life was not only dangerous. It was exhausting. Not occasionally. Constantly. The sheer effort required to remain fed, warm, sheltered, and socially safe would crush people used to convenience. Survival was a full-time occupation long before ambition, art, philosophy, or glory entered the picture. For most people, every day began with maintenance. Water. Fire. Food. Labor. Repair. Avoidance. Endurance. And if any one of those failed, the rest could collapse with it. But even that is not the worst part. The worst part is that ancient suffering often looked normal to the people inside it. Children dying young. Bodies bent by work. Teeth rotting early. Smoke-blackened rooms. Infections that lingered until they killed. Women facing childbirth like a door that might not open again. Men used up by labor before middle age. People living inside worlds where pain was so common it stopped being remarkable. That is the true distance between you and the ancient past. Not wisdom. Not courage. Not toughness. Systems. The invisible systems that hold your life together now would vanish the moment you stepped back in time. And without them, the ancient world would begin stripping you down immediately. First your comfort. Then your confidence. Then your health. And history was only getting started. Because the next thing that would try to kill you was something you cannot live without for more than a few days. Water. Water should have saved you. Instead, in ancient times, it might be the first thing that ends you. By noon, the heat is pressing down hard enough to empty the strength from your limbs. Your mouth is dry. Your head is beginning to pound. You find a source of water, and for one brief moment, the problem seems simple. Drink. Survive. Keep moving. But ancient water was never just water. It carried rivers of hidden danger through every civilization on Earth. A beautiful stream could be contaminated miles upstream by animals, corpses, sewage, runoff, or human settlement. A cistern could turn stale. A storage jar could breed life you could not see. A well could be precious one season and poison the next. Even in advanced cities with aqueducts, channels, and reservoirs, clean delivery did not guarantee clean handling. Water passed through hands, tools, containers, streets, and homes that were already soaked in contamination. That is the part modern people consistently underestimate. It is not enough for water to begin clean. It has to remain clean. And for most of history, that chain was fragile. So you drink anyway, because thirst gives you no choice. Nothing happens at first. That is what makes it so dangerous. Ancient illness rarely announces itself with theatrical timing. It waits. It settles in. It turns a normal afternoon into a sleepless night, then a bad day into a crisis. A little cramping. A little dizziness. Weakness in the legs. A stomach that will not settle. Then vomiting. Diarrhea. Dehydration. Confusion. No quick rehydration salts. No clinic around the corner. No certainty that rest will be enough. In a modern world, it is an awful inconvenience. In an ancient one, it can become a death spiral. And that spiral was common. One of the greatest killers in the ancient world was not war. It was what entered the body quietly. Dysentery. Cholera-like outbreaks in later eras. Parasites. Bacterial infections. Waterborne disease. Food contamination. Things too small to understand, but powerful enough to hollow out entire communities. People did not need to know germ theory to suffer from its absence. They lived inside it every day. Now add hunger. Because ancient food was just as uncertain as ancient water. We imagine grand feasts because history preserves the tables of the rich. But ordinary people did not live on banquet scenes. They lived on whatever was available, whatever season allowed, whatever survived storage, whatever could be afforded, and whatever did not run out first. Grain was often the backbone of survival. Bread, porridge, rough meals built on cereals, legumes, oil when available, maybe onions, maybe fish, maybe meat rarely, maybe fruit in season, maybe nothing varied enough to keep the body truly strong. That means even if food filled the stomach, it did not always protect the body. Malnutrition in the ancient world was not always dramatic starvation with visible bones. Sometimes it looked like weakness that never quite left. A child growing smaller than they should. A wound healing too slowly. Teeth weakening. Fatigue settling deeper each year. A body surviving, but not thriving. For the poor especially, food was often enough to continue labor, but not enough to build resilience. And resilience is what stands between sickness and death. Then there were the lean seasons. The harvest fails. The rains come late. The river changes. The roads become dangerous. Storage rots. Pests get into grain. Prices surge. A family starts stretching meals. Then comes the oldest arithmetic in human history: who eats first, who eats least, and how long the body can be asked to continue before it begins consuming itself. This is where the fantasy of I'd adapt starts collapsing. Most modern people do not understand how narrow the line is between stable eating and physical decline. Take away refrigeration, modern agriculture, fortified foods, antibiotics and livestock control, rapid transport, and year-round supply chains, and food becomes what it was for most of human history: a daily negotiation with uncertainty. And sometimes, even food itself fought back. Stored grain could be spoiled. Bread could contain grit from milling stones, slowly grinding down teeth over years. Meat could be unsafe. Fish could turn quickly. Milk was unstable. Oil could go rancid. Fruit could ferment or rot. Insects infested storage. Rodents found their way in. Mold spread silently. The ancient eater was not just choosing what tasted good. They were gambling on what would not poison them, weaken them, or disappear before next month. But hunger and sickness were only part of the trap. The real cruelty was how they worked together. A body weakened by poor nutrition is easier for disease to conquer. A body struck by disease cannot keep food down. Dehydration worsens everything. Fever burns energy the body no longer has. A parasite steals nutrients from a person already living near the edge. An infection that might be survivable in a healthy adult becomes far more dangerous in someone underfed, overworked, and sleeping badly. In ancient times, one problem rarely stayed one problem for long. It became a chain reaction. That is why entire households could begin to collapse from what looked like one ordinary event. One bad batch of water. One season of poor grain. One illness brought in from a market, a caravan, a harbor, a military camp. Trade connected the ancient world in brilliant ways, but it also carried disease along the same routes as wealth. Ports, roads, and crowded cities made civilization powerful. They also made it vulnerable. And cities were worse than most viewers imagine. We think of cities as places of opportunity, protection, and culture. In ancient times, they were all of those things. They were also engines of concentration. More people, more waste, more crowding, more animals, more stored food, more contaminated surfaces, more chances for sickness to pass from one body to another. A rural life brought its own dangers, but urban life packed risk tightly together. If disease entered, it did not need long to find another host. That is the terrifying logic of the ancient world. The same things that made civilization possible often made survival harder. Bread fed empires, but poor grain could leave populations weak. Roads spread commerce, but they spread disease too. Markets created abundance, but also contamination. Water systems sustained cities, but a failure anywhere in the chain could poison thousands. Human progress was real. So was its cost. And through all of this, you would still be trying to act normal. Trying to eat what others eat. Drink what others drink. Hide your discomfort. Learn customs fast enough not to stand out. Because in the ancient world, weakness was not just dangerous to your health. It could damage your place in the social order. If you cannot work, carry, trade, walk, obey, harvest, cook, or endure, then your body stops being merely your problem. It becomes everyone else's calculation. That is another reason you would be in trouble. Survival was communal, but it was not sentimental. If you slow the group down, if you consume scarce food while contributing too little, if you appear fragile in a hard season, ancient life can become brutally unsympathetic. Most communities cared for their own, but resources had edges. Compassion had limits. And there was no modern safety net waiting under the fall. So the water makes you sick. The sickness weakens you. The weak body cannot absorb food. The bad food worsens the weakness. The weakness invites more illness. And all of it unfolds in a world that still expects you to wake up tomorrow and work. That is what ancient survival really was. Not one dramatic moment. A slow contest between the body and everything entering it. And if water and hunger did not finish you first, something smaller might. Something so small you would never see it. A parasite. It would not be the battle that kills you. It would be the blister. A small one. Barely worth noticing at first. Raised skin on the heel from rough sandals, bad stitching, too much walking, too little rest. In the modern world, it is an annoyance. A strip of padding. A cleaner pair of socks. Maybe an antiseptic wipe. Maybe nothing at all. In ancient times, that blister can become an opening. The skin breaks. Dirt gets in. Sweat keeps it wet. Dust settles into it. Leather rubs against it again. You keep walking because you have to. Everyone keeps walking. There is no pause button in a world built on labor. By nightfall it hurts. By morning it is swollen. A day later it is warm to the touch. Then red. Then angry. Then something deeper begins moving under the surface, something invisible and patient, turning a tiny wound into a private disaster. This is where modern imagination fails again. People assume ancient survival was about toughness, as if the stronger person simply lasted longer. But strength is useless when the body is breached and there is no reliable way to stop what enters next. A cut from a knife, a scrape from a wall, a splinter driven deep into the hand, a thorn caught under the skin, a cracked lip in winter, a burn from cooking, a bite from an insect, a fall on stone, one bad step on a road filled with animal waste and human filth. None of these sound heroic. That is exactly why they were so dangerous. Ancient death often began with ordinary damage. A farmer slices his palm while working. A laborer crushes a toe. A porter tears a shoulder. A child scrapes a knee. A woman burns her forearm lifting a pot. A soldier survives the battle and dies later from what happened after. Before modern antisepsis, before antibiotics, before a real understanding of infection, the body was not just fragile. It was exposed. Every injury was a negotiation with chance. And chance was cruel. Some wounds closed. Some did not. Some festered. Some spread heat and pain up the limb. Some filled with pus. Some brought fever. Some made the skin darken around the edges. In the worst cases, the injury stopped being local. It entered the blood. It entered the whole body. Then the person who looked merely hurt yesterday is shivering, delirious, weak, and frighteningly close to death. You would learn quickly that pain in the ancient world was not an interruption. It was an environment. A modern person lives inside layers of pain control so normal they barely notice them. Numbing gel. Ibuprofen. Antibiotics. Sterile bandages. Local anesthesia. Emergency care. Imaging. Sutures. Follow-up treatment. Rest days. In the ancient world, pain was often endured because there was no other path. You worked through it, walked through it, slept beside it, sweated through it, and hoped it did not become something irreversible. And nowhere would that reality hit harder than in the mouth. If you were dropped into ancient times with perfect modern teeth, history would begin attacking them immediately. Coarse bread made with ground grain often contained tiny stone particles from the milling process, slowly wearing enamel down over years. Diets could be repetitive. Oral hygiene existed in some forms, but nothing like the dependable protection most people rely on now. A cavity would not remain a manageable inconvenience. It would deepen. Nerves would wake. Eating would hurt. Drinking would hurt. Cold air might hurt. Sleep would become difficult. Then infection could follow. A toothache in the ancient world was not just pain. It was a siege. The jaw swells. The face changes shape. Fever comes. The ache stops being sharp and becomes total, a pounding presence behind the eye and under the skull. There is no quick appointment. No root canal. No antibiotics to calm the infection before it moves. Maybe someone offers a remedy made from herbs, wine, smoke, mineral paste, prayer, or folklore. Maybe it helps a little. Maybe it does nothing. Maybe the tooth is pulled by force with terrible tools and worse odds. Even if you survive, the experience teaches the same lesson as everything else in the past. The body does not need to fail dramatically to ruin your chances. It only needs one weak point. And medicine, the thing you would want to trust next, was itself a gamble. Ancient medicine was not useless. That is important. People observed patterns. Some remedies had real value. Some plants reduced pain. Some practices cleaned wounds better than leaving them alone. Some physicians were thoughtful, experienced, even astonishingly perceptive for their time. But ancient medicine existed inside limits so severe that even the best healer often stood powerless before infection, internal injury, severe trauma, or disease they could describe but not stop. Knowledge without tools becomes tragedy very quickly. A healer may know that a wound is worsening. They may know the fever is dangerous. They may recognize a swelling, a fracture, a labor complication, a chest infection, a poisoned bite. Recognition is not cure. Without sterile technique, without blood transfusion, without modern surgery, without precise diagnostics, without dependable drugs, treatment was often a race between instinct, tradition, luck, and whatever strength the patient had left. That means a modern person entering the ancient world would suffer not only from worse health conditions, but from a terrifying collapse in certainty. Today, pain usually comes with a plan. You know where to go. You know whom to call. You know the injury can be seen, named, and acted on. In the ancient world, the body can become mysterious again. The pain means something is wrong, but how wrong? Is it temporary? Fatal? Contagious? Fixable? Nobody knows for sure. That uncertainty eats at people. Imagine lying awake with a fever in a dim room, listening to other bodies breathe. You feel heat behind your eyes. Your wound throbs with each heartbeat. Someone touches your forehead and says a few words you only half understand. Outside, life continues. A cart rolls by. Someone argues in the alley. Somewhere a baby is coughing. Somewhere a dog is barking. And you realize with perfect clarity that if this gets worse, there may be no line between illness and death except time. That is the terror modern people are least prepared for. Not pain itself, but pain without control. And then there are broken bones. A bad fall in the modern world is serious. In the ancient world, it can erase your future. A broken ankle means you cannot walk. A broken arm means you cannot carry or defend yourself properly. Ribs crack and every breath becomes work. A damaged back can turn a worker into a burden overnight. Bones can be set, splinted, wrapped, supported, yes. Ancient people were not ignorant. But recovery depends on rest, nutrition, hygiene, and stable support, exactly the things many ancient lives could not spare. In other words, injury was rarely an isolated event. It threatened your social value as well as your body. If you cannot work, someone else must work more. If you cannot travel, you must be protected. If you cannot carry water, harvest grain, grind flour, tend animals, cook food, or keep pace, survival stops being about healing and starts becoming about whether your community can afford your weakness. For elites, that equation looked different. For everyone else, the margin was thin. That same brutal arithmetic shaped childbirth, too. For modern viewers, birth often exists inside hospitals, trained care, emergency intervention, blood management, sterile tools, and postnatal treatment. In the ancient world, childbirth was one of the most ordinary events in human life, and one of the most dangerous. A world that celebrated fertility also buried mothers and infants with horrifying regularity. One difficult labor, one retained placenta, one hemorrhage, one infection, one breach of bad luck, and a family's future could change in a single night. But even before birth, the ancient body was already under attack from another force modern people barely think about. Relentless labor. And once your body begins to wear down from that, even surviving the day becomes its own kind of battle. By now, you are still alive. That does not mean you are surviving. Because ancient life did not only kill with disease, hunger, or injury. It also wore people down. Slowly. Daily. So steadily that exhaustion became part of the landscape. The human body was not simply expected to work in the ancient world. It was consumed by work. From the moment the light returned, labor began again. Not symbolic labor. Not the kind that ends with a chair, a lunch break, and climate control. Physical labor. Repetitive labor. Labor tied directly to survival. Carrying water. Chopping fuel. Grinding grain. Hauling goods. digging earth, repairing walls, lifting sacks, turning soil, walking long distances under weight, gathering, dragging, sweeping, washing, pounding, stirring, shaping, pulling, cutting. The kind of work that makes the hands split, the shoulders harden, the back throb, and the knees begin failing years before old age. And there was no such thing as being too tired in the way modern people understand it. If the fire goes out, someone relights it. If the grain is not ground, someone goes hungry. If the water is not carried, nobody drinks. If the roof leaks, the rain does not wait for a better day. Every task feeds another task. Every chore prevents a larger problem. Ancient life was not a schedule. It was a chain reaction of necessities, and once you fell behind, the consequences began arriving immediately. That is why a modern person would break faster than they expect. Not because ancient people were superhuman, but because they were conditioned by a world that trained endurance into every hour of life. Their muscles, feet, posture, sleep patterns, diet, and habits were shaped by constant physical demand. Yours were shaped by machines, chairs, paved roads, electric light, and systems designed to spare effort whenever possible. Drop a modern body into ancient conditions, and it would feel the difference almost at once. The shoulders would burn first. Then the feet. Then the lower back, where fatigue settles deep and stubborn and turns each movement into negotiation. You would wake sore, work sore, sit sore, stand sore, and sleep sore, if sleep came at all. There would be no sports recovery, no clean protein shake, no compression gear, no hot shower waiting at dusk. Only another day, and another, each one asking the same question: can your body still pay the cost of being here? And the weather would not care about the answer. Ancient life meant exposure. Not permanent, total exposure, but far more than modern people are built to tolerate. Winter was not just cold. It was invasive. It entered through cracks in walls, through damp fabric, through weak roofing, through the slow failure of fuel supplies. It settled in fingers, joints, lungs, and sleeping places. It made mornings cruel and nights dangerous. In a world without central heating, stable insulation, or effortless temperature control, the season itself became an opponent. Summer brought its own punishment. Heat without relief is not simply uncomfortable. It drains judgment. It thickens the air. It speeds rot. It spoils food faster. It attracts insects. It turns heavy labor into a test of hydration and endurance that many bodies fail. In hot climates, the ancient world could become a furnace of dust, glare, sweat, and thirst. In humid places, heat wrapped itself around the body like wet cloth, making rest feel impossible and work feel endless. And then there was smoke. It is one of the least glamorous dangers in the ancient world, which is exactly why it matters. For much of history, the fire that kept you alive also damaged you. Cooking fires, heating fires, indoor flames, low ventilation, enclosed rooms, shared shelters, workshops, kilns, furnaces. Smoke clung to ceilings and lungs alike. It reddened eyes, irritated throats, and over time carved its mark into the body. A modern person might think of smoke as a temporary nuisance. For many ancient households, it was part of breathing. Imagine ending a day already tired, already sore, already underfed, and then trying to rest in a space where the air itself works against you. That is another ancient illusion shattered. People speak of shelter as if having a roof meant having safety. But shelter in the ancient world often came with compromise. A house might keep out rain and still trap dampness. A room might provide walls and still crowd bodies so closely that sleep becomes shallow and disease spreads easily. A bed might be nothing more than woven material over rough structure, or straw that holds insects and stale smell. Privacy could be rare. Silence even rarer. Domestic life was not always peaceful retreat. It was often another arena of discomfort. You would hear everything. Coughing from the other side of the room. Movement in the rafters. Footsteps in the alley. Wind forcing itself through gaps in the wall. Animals shifting in nearby spaces. Crying children. Arguments. Snoring. The low crackle of embers not fully dead. Ancient sleep was not the clean, sealed, protected state most people depend on now. It was lighter, more fragmented, more vulnerable. And sleep that never fully restores the body turns every hardship sharper the next day. This is how ancient life wins. Not always with one catastrophe. Often with accumulation. The body begins losing ground in increments. A little less sleep. A little more cold. A little more strain. A little less food quality. A little more soreness. A little less healing. A little more smoke. A little more dehydration. A little more work. Ancient people were incredibly adaptive because they had to be. But even they paid for it. Bent backs. Damaged joints. Chronic pain. Early wear. Lives measured not only by years but by how quickly the body had been used. And if you think wealth solved everything, only partly. Yes, the rich could secure better shelter, better food, servants, more insulation from daily labor, perhaps cleaner living spaces, perhaps safer storage, perhaps some access to learn medicine. But no one in the ancient world fully escaped the limits of the age. Cold still arrived. Heat still oppressed. Infection still threatened. Childbirth still killed. Teeth still rotted. Smoke still rose. Disease still crossed class lines. Wealth softened reality. It did not abolish it. For the poor, though, reality had no padding at all. A hard winter could turn into famine. A weak roof could become illness. A season of labor could become permanent injury. One missed harvest, one injured animal, one broken tool, one flood, one fire, one storm, and survival narrowed fast. Ancient lives were resilient, but they were also precarious. The margin between coping and collapse was often terrifyingly small. And that precarity changes the way people think. When every day depends on work, people become less patient with weakness. Less tolerant of delay. Less able to stop everything for one person's suffering. Not because they are heartless, but because the world around them is hard enough to force impossible calculations. Who rests? Who works? Who eats more? Who travels? Who stays behind? Who is worth protecting at higher cost? In ancient life, the body was never just personal. It was economic, social, practical. So as your muscles fail, your feet blister, your sleep deteriorates, and the weather keeps pressing in, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. You are not simply tired. You are becoming vulnerable. And in the ancient world, vulnerability was noticed. By masters. By rulers. By creditors. By soldiers. By strangers. By anyone with more power than you. Because once the body began to weaken, the next danger was no longer just nature. It was people. People are the part of ancient life most viewers think they understand. They picture armies, gladiators, raiders on horseback, kings giving impossible orders, slave markets, public executions, men with spears at the edge of empire. And yes, all of that existed. Ancient times could be violently spectacular. But spectacle is not what would most likely destroy you. Power would. Because surviving the ancient world was not just about avoiding disease or enduring labor. It was about knowing where you stood in a system that could punish weakness, difference, poverty, and outsider status with terrifying speed. In the modern world, most people move through daily life under a set of assumptions so basic they feel invisible. That the law, however imperfectly, belongs to everyone. That there are procedures, appeals, documents, rights, witnesses, institutions, distinctions between debt and bondage, accusation and proof, punishment and whim. Strip those away, and human life changes shape very quickly. Imagine arriving in an ancient city with no family name anyone respects, no tribe, no citizenship, no patron, no land, no recognized trade, no place in the local chain of loyalty, and no one powerful enough to say, "This person is under my protection." You would not just be vulnerable. You would be legible as vulnerable. And the ancient world was very good at seeing opportunity in that. The first danger is simple: you do not belong. You do not know the customs deeply enough, the speech patterns clearly enough, the sacred boundaries carefully enough. You do not know who can be insulted by accident, which gesture means respect, which market cheat to avoid, which official expects payment, which road belongs to whose men after dark. A modern person often assumes intelligence can solve this. Watch closely. Adapt quickly. Learn. But survival in older societies depended on more than intelligence. It depended on being woven into recognized networks. Kinship. Patronage. Clan. Citizenship. Temple ties. Military service. Household bonds. Status. Reputation. Land. Without those, you can become less like a person and more like a moving risk. Someone unprotected can be cheated more easily, beaten more easily, accused more easily, taxed, extorted, conscripted, or robbed with fewer consequences for the people doing it. That is the cold mathematics of unequal worlds. And ancient law was unequal by design. We romanticize famous legal codes because writing laws down feels like civilization becoming rational. But many ancient legal systems were explicit about hierarchy. Penalties differed by rank, sex, status, citizenship, freedom, and property. The same act could mean one punishment for the powerful and another for the disposable. Justice was not always blind. Often it stared directly at class and answered accordingly. If you are poor, your body becomes collateral. If you are indebted, your freedom can narrow fast. If you are foreign, your words may count less. If you are enslaved, the law may treat your pain as a management issue. And if you are a woman, a child, a captive, a laborer, or anyone at the bottom of an ancient hierarchy, danger is no longer occasional. It is structural. That is why the fantasy of "I just keep my head down" does not really work. Keeping your head down assumes power will ignore you. Ancient systems often did not. They needed labor, revenue, obedience, soldiers, servants, bodies that could be moved, taxed, punished, traded, married off, claimed, or disciplined. The individual was rarely as private or self-determining as a modern viewer imagines. Your household, your obligations, your body, your fertility, your output, your loyalties, even your clothing could place you inside systems you never chose. And once inside, getting out was rarely simple. Debt alone could ruin a life. One failed season. One broken animal. One injury that keeps you from working. One need to borrow grain, tools, money, or protection. Ancient economies could be sophisticated, but they were unforgiving. If you owe and cannot pay, your future begins shrinking. Maybe land is lost. Maybe freedom is compromised. Maybe children inherit the burden. Maybe service becomes coercion. Maybe the line between work and captivity disappears so gradually that by the time you name it, it has already closed around you. Modern people often think ancient violence arrived loudly. Sometimes it arrived as paperwork, witnesses, and social pressure. Sometimes it arrived in the form of a contract you could not escape, a master you could not refuse, an official you could not challenge, a creditor whose patience had ended. In a world with fewer buffers between power and the body, consequences were immediate. There was no social media outrage, no labor tribunal, no emergency legal aid, no assumption that the system must explain itself to you. Then there was public punishment. The ancient world loved examples. A penalty was not always only for the guilty. It was a message to everyone watching. Beatings, mutilation, branding, public shaming, imprisonment in brutal conditions, forced labor, execution, exposure. Different cultures used different methods, but the principle was chillingly familiar across time. Order is preserved not only through rules, but through fear. Imagine living where pain is part of governance, where the body can be used to communicate authority, where punishment is visible on skin, where justice, revenge, discipline, and theater blur together in the same public square. A modern person would not just fear being hurt. They would fear the total insecurity of not knowing how little it might take to trigger the attention of power. And war, the danger everyone expects, was worse in practice than in legend. Ancient war was not only clash and glory. It was disease in camp, forced marches, cold nights, filthy wounds, starvation tactics, siege hunger. Cities strangled until people ate what no one should eat. Captives taken as labor. Villages burned. Fields destroyed. Women assaulted. Children displaced. Men impressed into armies that could grind them down long before battle began. Even if you were never a soldier, war could still reach you through taxes, requisitions, raids, refugees, and grain shortages. It is one thing to admire an empire from a museum. It is another to be a nameless person living under its appetite. And even peace could be violent. Because peace in ancient times often meant simply that the usual structures of domination were functioning as intended. Work was extracted. Taxes collected. Rules enforced. Bodies kept in line. Temples, courts, households, estates, and armies all played their part in holding the world together. The civilization you now admire for its roads, monuments, and literature may have depended on millions of ordinary people living under pressures they could never meaningfully refuse. That is the part history's grand images rarely show. The laborer terrified of falling into debt. The servant unable to leave. The widow with no protection. The foreigner blamed first. The peasant watching officials arrive. The enslaved body treated as property. The child learning very early that power is something you survive, not question. And if you think charm would save you, think again. A modern personality trained in openness, individualism, and self-expression might be dangerous in the wrong ancient setting. Too much eye contact. Too much confidence. The wrong joke. The wrong refusal. The wrong tone with the wrong person at the wrong time. Cultures across the ancient world were complex and varied, but many shared one hard truth: status had to be read correctly. Failure to read it could cost far more than embarrassment. So by now, ancient life has already attacked you from every angle. Your water is dangerous. Your food is uncertain. Your body is vulnerable. Your work is endless. And now the social world around you reveals its final cruelty: survival does not depend only on health or strength. It depends on being protected. On being recognized. On belonging to the right people. Without that, even a healthy body can vanish into the machinery of ancient power and never come back out. But there was one place where the ancient world became even more merciless than the street, the field, or the court. Home. Because the people you loved most were often the people history was most likely to take from you. Home. That word sounds safe until you live inside the ancient version of it. Because the ancient household was not only where you ate, slept, and rested. It was where medicine failed first. Where labor began early. Where infection lingered longest. Where grief became routine. And for many women, children, and the elderly, it was not refuge at all. It was the center of risk. Part of this is simple biology. Part of it is brutal history. The first chapter is one of the oldest dangers in human life. Childbirth. In the modern world, birth is a deeply managed event. Trained attendants. Emergency intervention. Hospitals. Anesthesia. Surgery when needed. Antibiotics afterward. Blood transfusion. Sonography. Monitoring. Sterile tools. Neonatal care. Recovery rooms. For most viewers, birth exists inside systems that hold both mother and child in a tight safety net built over generations of medical understanding. In the ancient world, the safety net was almost invisible. A woman could go into labor in a dim room, on a hard surface, surrounded by other women whose experience was built on memory, instinct, kindness, tradition, and accumulated folk knowledge. Some of that knowledge was genuinely helpful. Some of it was dangerous. Some of it helped only until a complication arrived that nothing in local practice could answer. And complications were common. A long labor. A breech presentation. A retained placenta. A hemorrhage that would not stop. An infection setting in within days. A body too young, too exhausted, too underfed, too often pregnant. Labor was not only painful. It was a door that could close forever. Women who survived their first birth were not guaranteed survival through their second, or their third, or their fifth. Each one asked the body a new question under conditions the modern world rarely replicates. And underneath each labor was a question modern people forget to ask. How many other children had she already buried? Because children died. A lot. Not occasionally. Not as dramatic tragedy. As ordinary weather. A fever that would not break. A cough that would not stop. An infection that entered through water, milk, soil, contact, or the air. A stomach illness too severe for a small body to survive. A complication during birth itself. The ancient world did not protect children the way modern medicine does, and it did not protect mothers either. Mothers sometimes died in childbirth. Infants sometimes died within days, weeks, or months. Sometimes they survived early illness only to be carried off by something else before their first year ended. This is why grief in ancient times was not embedded in language the way it is today. It was embedded in silence. Parents had to learn quickly how to love children without certainty of keeping them. Naming rituals sometimes waited. Grief was not always expressed openly. The emotional world adjusted itself to the arithmetic of survival. Children were loved. Deeply. Fiercely. But they were loved in a climate where permanence could not be promised. And that climate shaped everything. How children were held. How tightly. How often. How early they were taught to walk, work, carry, contribute, obey, and endure. Children were not always given years of protected play. They were introduced early to the physical and social demands of adult life because the household could not afford otherwise. Small hands were useful. Small feet could carry. Small voices could fetch. Survival of the family unit depended on every member giving something back. Even those who had just begun to walk. For girls, this often meant an apprenticeship in domestic labor. For boys, an apprenticeship in physical labor, trade, or military readiness, depending on the world into which they were born. Neither path was gentle. Gendered danger in the ancient world was not symbolic. It was structural. Women lived under pressures men often escaped. Reproductive risk. Domestic labor. Constant pregnancy in many households. Limited control over marriage, mobility, or property. Greater exposure to violence inside or outside the home. Fewer legal protections. Less autonomy over their own bodies. Less access to education, travel, public voice, and political influence. In some societies, women could rise. In many, the ceiling was thick and low. For women who did rise, there was still no escape from the biology of birth, the risks of childbirth, the strain of repeated motherhood, the vulnerability of widowhood, and the danger of being tied too closely to men whose debts, feuds, crimes, or political failures could fall onto them. That is the part the romanticized view of the ancient household never shows. It shows the hearth. The bread. The family. The festival. The marriage feast. It does not show the sudden silence after a fever takes a child. It does not show the father returning from market knowing his debtor is waiting. It does not show the wife watching her body thin between pregnancies. It does not show the widow realizing her protection died with her husband. It does not show the adolescent handed off to a household stranger for an arranged match that may or may not keep her safe. Grief was not rare in ancient life. It was the air many families breathed. Parents expected to bury children. Mothers expected to risk their lives repeatedly. Husbands expected to outlast wives. Grandparents expected to attend loss before they themselves weakened. Communities expected to absorb death often, sometimes in groups, sometimes in seasons, sometimes in terrible clusters that left entire households empty. That is not melodrama. That is the texture of most of human history. And even those who survived into older age did not always find gentleness. The elderly in the ancient world could be respected, yes. In many cultures, age was associated with authority, wisdom, and ritual power. But respect did not always equal safety. Older bodies wore out faster. Work became harder. Mobility shrank. Dependence increased. Care depended on family resources, which were not always generous. In lean seasons, the elderly could become a quiet burden. In dominant households, they could be sidelined. In extreme situations, they could be left behind. This is not said to punish the past. It is said to show how narrow the margin was for everyone inside it. Love existed. Real, fierce, generous, sacrificial love existed in ancient households. Families held together. Communities lifted them up when they could. People fought to save children, mothers, fathers, siblings, friends. The ancient world was not a wasteland of indifference. But it asked all of that love to do work modern systems now absorb quietly. Clean water. Stable food. Emergency medicine. Workplace protections. Child labor laws. Public health. Maternal care. Elder support. Social safety nets. Inheritance rights. Legal protections against violence. None of these luxuries were guaranteed in the ancient home. The household carried everything on its own. And when the burden became heavier than the family could hold, collapse did not wait. That is why ancient life was merciless, not because people were cruel, but because the surrounding systems were thin. The family was everything. And everything was fragile. So by now, ancient life has pressed against every part of your existence. Your water. Your food. Your teeth. Your wounds. Your work. Your weather. Your sleep. Your debt. Your freedom. Your social standing. Your home. Your loved ones. And still, survival has not been decided by anything dramatic. Nothing monstrous has killed you. No gladiator. No army. No execution. No fire swallowing the city. No invader dragging you from your bed. The ordinary has been trying to finish the job all along. And it is about to succeed. This is the part ancient history never advertises. There is no monument for it. No inscription. No epic poem. No museum case holding the object that explains it. Because the truth is quiet. The biggest killer in the ancient world was not spectacle. It was normality. It was the cup of water poured before dawn. It was the bread chewed at midday. It was the cracked tooth that throbbed through months. It was the smoke rising from the same fire that kept a family alive. It was the blister that opened on a long road. It was the fever that followed. It was the labor that bent a back before middle age. It was the debt signed during a bad season. It was the birth that came at the wrong time and the wrong year. It was the child buried without ceremony. It was the body worn down one quiet step at a time until something basic, something small, something unheroic, finally pushed it over. This is the final reveal. You would not die in the ancient world in some dramatic moment. You would die the way most people died. in the middle of ordinary life. That is what makes the past hard to study honestly. We remember kings because they were remembered. We remember battles because they were recorded. We remember temples and roads and ships because stone, papyrus, and memory preserve them. But we forget the millions of ordinary lives whose deaths left no name, no inscription, no surviving record. Their absence is the largest monument in human history. A vast silence of people who simply did not make it to old age. And their absence was not random. It was patterned. The patterns were water sources not properly protected. Food storage not properly managed. Exhaustion treated as routine. Wounds treated as fate. Childbirth treated as unavoidable. Illness treated as punishment. Vulnerability treated as personal weakness. Pain treated as ordinary weather. What changes in the modern world is not the human body. The body is largely the same. The same organs. The same immune system. The same teeth. The same skin. The same vulnerability to infection, exhaustion, injury, and time. What changes is the invisible wall of systems now standing around that body every single day. Clean water arrives without negotiation. Pipes. Treatment. Filtration. Chlorination. Standards. Inspections. Sanitation removes waste before it becomes danger. Sewage systems, drains, plumbing, public hygiene. Food reaches you through chains so vast you never see how vast they are. Agriculture. Storage. Transport. Refrigeration. Preservation. Fortified nutrition. Quality control. Pain has a plan attached to it. Medication. Diagnostics. Hospitals. Specialists. Emergency services. Imaging. Surgery. Anesthesia. Recovery. Vaccines preempt diseases that used to arrive like weather. Antibiotics interrupt infections that used to hollow out bodies. Dental care stops cavities before they become infections. Maternal care protects both mother and child. Child labor laws keep small hands out of adult labor. Workplace protections slow the wear of repetitive physical strain. Heating systems, insulation, climate control, lighting, and stable housing protect the body from the weather most people no longer think about. Justice, even when imperfect, carries the assumption that power must explain itself to the governed. Documents. Witnesses. Defense. Appeal. Institutions. Norms protecting personal autonomy, bodily integrity, freedom from arbitrary punishment. None of these are perfect. Many places still struggle with them. But the assumption that they should exist at all is a major difference between now and the silent machinery of the ancient world. All of it, every layer, took centuries of collective struggle to build. Most of it lives so silently that modern people rarely notice it is there. But it is the reason an ordinary day in the present does not feel like a battle against existence. This is the most uncomfortable part of the documentary. Because it implies something difficult to sit with. The reason you might survive today is not that you are stronger, wiser, braver, or tougher than ancient people. It is that you arrived into systems built by people who suffered, tested, failed, experimented, and died while constructing them. Antiseptic technique emerged from people who watched patients die from invisible causes. Vaccination emerged from people who watched bodies fall to diseases that could be prevented. Sanitation emerged from people who saw filth kill before they understood why. Labor rights emerged from people who saw bodies crushed by systems that ignored them. Each invisible wall in your life is a memorial to invisible failure in the past. Pull those walls away, and the ancient world returns immediately. Not as fantasy. Not as adventure. As ordinary danger, pressed against ordinary bodies, in ordinary places, most of them invisible, most of them quiet, and most of them lethal. That is the final reversal this documentary promised. Ancient history is not magnificent because it lifts the human spirit. It is magnificent only because so many of its ordinary difficulties still killed the vast majority of those who lived through it. When you look at Rome, Greece, Egypt, Persia, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, the dynasties of China, the kingdoms of Africa, the cities of the Americas, what you are seeing is not only triumph. You are seeing the thin upper surface of survival. Below it, the silenced majority struggled with the same pressures this documentary has traced step by step. Water, food, injury, labor, weather, power, birth, death. The ordinary made lethal by the absence of systems that today's viewers assume as background. And that assumption is itself the miracle. The remarkable thing about modern life is not its technology, its speed, its machines, or its reach. It is that the ordinary day no longer feels like a contest against death. You wake inside warmth. You drink without fear. You eat without calculation. You sleep inside walls that hold. You leave home without escort. You travel without imagining every road as a threat. You work without expecting your body to be used up before midlife. You speak without counting every word as political risk. You hurt without assuming the hurt will win. None of that is natural. All of it was earned. That is the haunting that should stay with the viewer after the closing shot. The ancient world was not a stage for legends. It was the world most humans lived in. It was loud, foul, dangerous, fragile, exhausting, unjust, and ordinary. Empires rose over its surface. Philosophers walked its streets. Priests blessed its routines. And in the everyday, in the kitchen, in the field, in the alley, in the birthing room, in the well, in the workshop, in the cold, in the heat, ordinary people fought to stay alive for one more day with very little protecting them. The miracle is not ancient greatness. The miracle is that any of them survived at all. And the promise of this documentary is that when you return to your ordinary day after watching it, you will not see the same world again. You will notice the clean water you never think about. The roof you never inspect. The emergency care you never question. The labor protections you never read about. The food chain you never walk. The medicine sitting quietly in your cabinet. The simple stability of moving through a day without expecting sudden disaster. None of it is guaranteed forever. None of it arrived from nowhere. And none of it should ever be taken for granted. Because the ancient world is not behind us. It is one bad season, one broken system, one silent failure, away from returning. History was not a lesson written in stone. It was a warning written in bone. And the listener who hears it, finally, is the one who still has time to listen.